Now earlier we were mentioning shell fire, and the shell fire table is below the artillery firepower table. This is the normal artillery fire table up here at the top. Here's the shell fire table. Works exactly the same way as I previously exampled. We have the type of shell, small shell, large shell, siege mortar or siege rockets, or all field rockets. How many barrels or tubes or whatever are firing, cross-reference, comes down to give you a base percentage, and then again you have your A, B, or C class fires and the mass and linear target lines to reflectively take a choice of the percentages. So if you had a large howitzer firing a large shell, and it was an 8-gun battery like a Prussian one, 8, and it was a B-class fire and it's shooting at a mass target, it's got an 86% chance to cause a loss. Now, bear in mind, when you're dealing with shell fire, if there's any firepower or the distance to the target is going more than 15 inches, you have to then consult the accuracy table, which is below the shell fire table, and roll a 6-sided die and read off the results. This column refers to shell fire, this column refers to rocket attacks or rocket firepower. And in some cases, like number 1, it uses the word missed. That basically means the whole shot missed. End of story. If they rolled maybe number 2, it's train damaged at 50% of effect. That means you can only damage the train which the unit is hiding behind. It will not cause any actual loss of the actual figures, but it might cause fires and things of that nature. Come on down to all the way down to 5, normal attack percentage on the target and terrain. Basically means whatever the percentage you calculated up here is going to end up being down here. Also, keep in mind, you have to look over here on the right side, the artillery firepower modifiers, for shell fire, just as you do for normal artillery fire. Now the difference between shell fire and round shot is if it lands on target, it might cause fires, particularly things like buildings. Wood buildings or class 1 buildings are very susceptible to this. Same thing for grain fields or something. So in some cases, when you fire, if you roll a low enough percentage, you basically have a multiplier here. For example, for howitzers, when they land on a class 1 building, it's 5% per barrel shooting. So if you've got an 8-gun battery firing, 8 times 5, there's a 40% chance you're going to set that wood building on fire if you roll a 40% or less on the target. Notice the fire rolls are not modified by firepower morale modifiers unless there's something that's in between you and the target. And last but least, remember on rocket attacks, there's a chance if you roll a 1, you're going to lose the launcher and have to take a morale check for self-infliction of the same wound. Conversely, if you get hits, you might increase your firepower by more than 50% if you roll a 6. And rockets have the special morale check rolls. If you actually hit a unit, it might actually scatter or rout with additional modifiers and or outrightly surrender due to the rocket attack. There were several instances in the Battle of Leipzig, in this example where French squares just totally outright surrendered to the English rocket battery. Last but least, we have the artillery critical hit table, which is here. It's underneath the artillery firepower table. Anytime you roll and get hits on the guns, if you're using infantry firepower, it actually removes the entire crew figure and the battery at the same time. But artillery hits on the battery means you've lost a cannon and or their individual crews to the individual cannons of the battery. Anytime you get a hit on a cannon, and in some cases like canister shots, which causes 2 cannon loss, or a round shot that causes 1 cannon loss, you can have multiple rolls on this table. For each cannon lost in the battery, you roll a 6-sided dice, and you roll under here to see what happens. In most circumstances, it's going to be simply a counter battery A. But in other cases, it would be a counter battery B, or it might actually ask you to re-roll in the chart below, which means it's an extra critical hit. You basically have to read the instructions and apply the results. If you actually shoot at a train unit, these are the things which carry a lot of ammunition in them, and you land with a shell fire or something of that nature, there's a chance you might actually even get an explosion at the end result here. Keep in mind when you fire rocket fire or shell fire at artillery batteries and you get hits or cannon loss, there's an additional +1 to each roll on this top table and the bottom table. Counter battery A's, counter battery B's, basically if you get a counter battery B, you must fire back at the enemy on your first opportunity. You basically have drawn their fire and that's their sole attention. The only exception to this would be if you're actually being shocked in the front of the battery. And it's so written on the counter battery table down here. If you get a counter battery A, then on your next opportunity fire, if you would elect to fire, you must fire at an enemy battery. Otherwise, you can just remain silent. Last but least, remember, under artillery firepower, there is an ammo tracking system, so you don't want to waste shots on what we call poor shots. You're going to generally wait for the good shots and utilize the firepower of the artillery at that point in time, because there is a limited amount of artillery which they can carry before they have to get a reload situation. A battery will never officially run totally out of ammunition, but once it's expired its basic load, it will then go to a low or almost out of ammunition type status, which effectively means it's going to fire at 1/4 effectiveness until it has a chance to reload the cannon. And that usually is a case of simply meeting up with a train unit, and then you can return back to the line. So this is the artillery firepower table. It's all written on the sheets. It's pretty self-explanatory. It operates basically the same way as infantry firepower. And last but least, if you get a 0-1 or an 0-0 on a natural die roll, there's a chance there's an officer loss or critical officer loss test, just like you have for infantry. And you have to roll another 6-sided die to see if it's within range of the firing battery in this circumstance.